I think we're going to have a great conversation, super important topic to everybody in this room, procurement, and how do we go about buying innovative technologies and service to implement those technologies. And to help us through this conversation, we have a great panel of experts. And as we get into what they're focused on, some of their bios, I just want to briefly introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Alboum. I'm the federal CTO for ServiceNow. But before I worked at ServiceNow, I worked in the federal government for a long time, primarily at the Department of Agriculture and as a chief information officer at different agencies within USDA and then at the department itself. And I also had the opportunity during my federal career to serve for a period of time as a deputy senior procurement executive at USDA. So I saw this procurement and IT collaboration from both sides. And I can tell you that in the technology space, in the CIO world, if you don't have a strong procurement team, if you can't get contracts out and you can't get good vendors and hardware and software in, you're not going to be very successful. And it takes a strong collaboration. So that's going to be one of the things we talk about today. And we want this to be a very interactive conversation. So if you have questions along the way, raise your hand, let us know, and we'll integrate those into our conversation. So I want to get started though by having our panel tell us a little about themselves. And Patrick, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I think it's really cool that you have a bunch of contracting professionals up here. I do think that there is a lot of importance of bringing the 1102 perspective on the IT space. I'm the Chief of Contracting Office at the IT division for US ICE. Previously, I held warrants at the Air Force and the Navy, been at ICE since 2020. And I think sharing a little bit about my portfolio will kind of also share a little bit about my take on contracting. I have 4 different sections, and one of my sections is focused on HSI. Each of my sections is very customer-oriented. So HSI, and one of our big contracts with HSI that's coming up for a recompete is called investigative case management. One of the things that we're doing on that contract that I think is an important point for me is that we are having an industry day. So early, often communication with industry is really something we foot stomp and make sure happens, whether through RFIs, draft RFPs, or industry days. And then another one of my sections is the solutions delivery. That's where we had a huge $340 million IDIQ that we awarded a couple years ago called SWIFT. The reason I bring that up is, first of all, SWIFT 2.0 is coming around the corner before we know it. But also, SWIFT was a way that we were able to incorporate some efficiencies into a contract so that down the road, when my customer, the OCIO, needs something done, we can go a lot quicker and we can get a quick turnaround. So at the end of the last fiscal year, we had 8 task orders that we got the requirement within 1 month to award. So SWIFT is one of our really quick turn vehicles. Another section I have is called operations. Operations is where we have our big cloud contract. We also have a new requirement for video teleconferencing. And what we're going to try and do with video teleconferencing, I think, is going to really shorten, again, the timeline from requirement to award by having, first of all, having a BPA, so having one vendor, having that competition up front, and then being able to award rather than having less than SAT buys that are competed, and I have to have my contracting officer do a justification for award each time around. So it'll be a lot more streamlined in video teleconferencing. And then the 4th section is ERO. So for those, I'm sure most of the room is familiar with ICE's structure, enforcement removals operations. Enforcement removals has an ERO O&M contract that is really doing a lot of the O&M of the major apps and the major applications for ERO. One way that we've tried to incorporate the speed and efficiency into that contract is by pivoting after award. So having the flexibility after award to say, hey, we want to focus on this notice to appear micro app. which was really important to getting people processed across the border a lot quicker. So we pivoted the contract to being performance-based, focusing on getting the deliverable of that micro app into the hands of our law enforcement officers a lot quicker. And by making it performance-based, incentivize the contractor to also make that deliverable more quickly.
So just a lot of great information, Rob. We've corrected the slow start with the fast start. So Nick, why don't you share a little of your background and a couple of things you're working on.
Sure. So I'd like to thank HSDF for having CBP here today. It's great to be here. My name is Nick Martinelli. I'm the Division Director for the Information Technology Contracting Division at CBP. I have 3 branches that work under me, and we are supporting the Office of Information and Technology as well as our law enforcement partners. The OIT has 2 big groups, the enterprise infrastructure as well as the application side of the house. I've been with CBP since 2009 and have supported CBP in a number of various management capacity as well as contracting. Looking forward to the conversation here today, and we'll talk about some of the contracts during the Q&A.
Excellent. Bill.
What?
If you want.
I'm sorry. What?
We've had some time in the green room.
Yeah.
But he's the reason we were late. But
Yes.
if you want, share a little about your experience and what's
Sure.
top of mind for you.
Like Nick, thank you for inviting me. And I spent 22 years at the Department of the Navy. I moved over to ICE in 2007, and I want to thank Ashley Lewis, who took a big chance and hired me at ICE in 2007. And Luke McCormick is around here somewhere. He's the person who first told me, you should apply for these senior executive positions. I could see you doing that. So I did it. I ended up doing that. I worked at ICE for almost 10 years, with a little break at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, where I got selected to the Senior Executive Service, came back to ICE as the head of contracting, retired, worked for a company called Guidepost Solutions, Julie Meyer's company. She used to be the Assistant Secretary for ICE. They hired me to be a federal acquisitions consultant. I did that for a while. I came back to federal service in 2020. Some of you may remember there was some sort of health thing going on in 2020, and business development and events like this were not happening. So I went back to federal service. I've been at TSA since November of 2020. I've got both of my COVID boosters on-prem there. So I passed 3 years there now, and I'm happy to be here. I'm the head of contracting at TSA now. So everything
Bill,
they do plus
I want
else.
to ask you the first question.
Okay.
We know there's a lot of ways to solve technology problems, a lot of technologies, a lot of different providers. Choices we can make. We can, buy something. We can build something. I'd like to start with you and ask you, how have you approached those kinds of conversations with the IT organizations you work with? How does that happen at TSA today? How do you have that, interaction so you get the right technology, the right service for the problem we're solving?
I think that the biggest thing that we can do is obviously have a great working relationship with the CIO and their organization to really define what it is they want. And then doing market research and partnering with industry to see what's out there. A lot of times in the past and even today, the government thinks they know exactly what they want. Here's a statement of work, go put that out and get people to bid on that. As opposed to saying, here's the problem we're trying to solve, and can you tell us what you have that might solve that problem? And that's why we get to leverage what industry is doing out there. And usually industry is doing a lot more innovative things than we know about. So having a CIO and a CTO, technology officer, that are aware of what's going on. There's a ton of IT companies out there. A lot of them are here today, I think. And There's a lot of good solutions out there, a lot of good products, a lot of good solutions to problems. I read something recently that says stop defining requirements and start defining problems. That's what we're trying to get to do. An RFP is really like a cry for help, if you think of it, and people have heard me say that before. So really partnering with them to find out what they want and solicit that, as opposed to just soliciting what you solicited 5 years ago and hoping that somebody will provide some innovation. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Nick. I'm curious what that looks like at CBP.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Just want to make sure my mic's working. So I would echo a lot of the same things that Bill had said. I think that where CBP wants to move is, and where I think I'd like the team to move is, you know, not only are we talking with our CIO and our deputy CIOs, but then also speaking directly with some of the business owners or the law enforcement partners that we have and sit with them as well to hear what they have to say about what they're using in the field and what they're encountering every single day. And then when it comes to the contracting piece of it, you know, doing some of the things like a draft RFP, but then also starting before that and sort of doing draft things in increments. So if we do have requirements or a cry for help or need, let's get the requirements out there to industry early as possible, so that they can give us feedback on what works, what could possibly be a better solution, and then sort of take that next incremental step to say, okay, you know, you've seen what the requirements look like, so here's how we're going to evaluate folks in the RFP process.
That's great. That dialogue becomes a real critical element to getting a good result, right? And you know, I'm just curious to add on to that. What kind of response do you typically get when you put something out to a draft RFP out to industry? Are you getting lots of responses? Are you getting valuable responses? Are there ways that folks in this room can respond that are more helpful or less so?
Yes, I think that so we always get a ton of response, which is, you know, it's great to get feedback from industry, both the positive and the negative, when they see issues with what we're doing, or with the, hey, you're headed in the right direction, and ultimately the solutions that they're bringing to the table. We've talked about, and some of the folks that are here in this room I've spoken with and said, hey, you know, tell us what you know what our requirements are, what's in the future. If you want to share a white paper with us, we're happy to engage with you. We'll review the white paper and we'll share that with our OIT leadership. So we always get a ton of response, and we try to be responsive to the people that have responded when we're doing market research, as well as when we're doing the responses to a draft PWS or a draft RFP. We want to do business that is going to get us the best technical solution, so we try to answer every question that we possibly can.
So we want those kinds of conversations ongoing. You know, proactive is very good too. Don't always wait, you know, for that RFP to come out. There's information that can come from the innovations Bill was describing, right, into the government. I experienced that firsthand as a CIO myself. So, Patrick, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, but I do want to get your take on things you're doing to make procurement more effective and efficient, go faster. I think everybody here would say these things take too long. Some of it's the back and forth, perhaps, but you know, the government wants to get it right. How do we speed it up?
Yeah, I do want to put a disclaimer out there, because I know that is the general consensus, that government takes too long to buy stuff. When we're doing an O&M services contract, which, you know, I'm sure a lot of contractors in this room perform, so long as we give ourselves enough runway, there's no sense in getting it done way in advance. We need adequate transition time. There are holdups with things like security processing, so we need to make sure we get our people on board with adequate transition time. However, you know, I don't need to go out and procure a services O&M contract for 2 years from now. There's no sense in really doing that 2 years ahead of time. Also, you know, let's be honest, this system wasn't exactly created 100% for speed. There's a lot of legislation behind sort of the requirements that me and my contracting officers have to check mark before we are able to award something. Whether or not speed is more important than those other interests, the legislation has decided that those other interests trump speed a lot of the time. So, things like protestability, vendor-to-vendor contracting, a protest is not something that's possible. However, when I'm awarding a contract, I have to ensure that this isn't something that, as much as I can, isn't going to be protested. Mm-hmm. So that there's a lot of other considerations.
Operationally in your office, though, you shared with me some of the things that you're doing just to run a better office.
Absolutely.
And make those interactions better. Why don't you share that with everyone?
Yeah, so within the parameters of that space, we do try and go as fast as possible. So I mentioned Swift up front. When we created Swift as an IDIQ, we saw it as an opportunity to really speed up that timeline to award. We've gone from 6 months when we had to post out on a strategic sourcing vehicle to 1 to 2 months. I mentioned the 7 to 8 task orders up front that we got done in 1 month. And this is complicated stuff. Hyper automation, platform as a service, various different things that we were able to evaluate and get on contract very quickly because we did the framework up front, we did the heavy lifting, we did the FAR 15, and exposed ourselves to potential protests, but because we were able to get through it, now we're able to do things a lot quicker. We can waive acquisition plans, for example, that otherwise would have gone up to potentially to DHS. I would have to go for approval for some of these task orders, but we don't need to create that extra paperwork. Some of the things are what are called pill techniques that we've been doing for a long time. We do oral presentations. We do two-phase down selects. So during our second phase or second look, we're typically looking at 3 or 4 offerers rather than everybody who was interested. They're advisory, so people can go through the extra legwork of doing a full proposal if they want to, but that does narrow the playing field. And then building in flexibility post-award. So one thing I mentioned up front was one of our contracts that had to pivot, the ERO O&M contract that we had to do an NTA micro-app that hadn't been envisioned at the time of award. So building in that flexibility when you know you need to. Not everything can be a performance-based contract. You don't know up front, necessarily, I want to build a rocket, for example, which is a very tangible thing that you could put as a performance-based contract. A lot of times, we don't know exactly where this thing's going to land 3, 4, 8 months down the road. So building in flexibility by having CLINs that are created to have either a personnel focus or a focus on surge. So we use surge CLINs for T&M. And we've also done not only options at the end of the year, but options within the year. So say HSI comes upon some money and they had this idea up front, then they're able to exercise that CLIN like that and get surge work done a lot more efficiently.
The flexibilities, and we want to all embrace that, right? So, Bill, I want to jump back to you for a second. Part of this panel is about emerging technology. You have the most experience of anybody up here buying technologies. You've seen a lot of emerging technologies over your time. Today, maybe it's artificial intelligence, but before it was cloud. Before that, it might have been something else. How have you gone about advising your CIOs and IT leaders, the folks with the requirements on how to embrace and use these things that we're hearing about, but maybe we don't know how to purchase yet?
What's interesting about that is that embracing emerging technology really involves taking on risk. And some CIOs, organizations are risk averse, very risk averse, and some recognize the value of taking on risk to meet the mission. When you work in an organization like DHS, which is very threat-oriented, mission-centric, you have to be able to take on risk because the adversaries that you're dealing with have no risk parameters at all. They have no, I've often said that if we could get the enemy, the threat actors to go through the same type of budget and approval process that we go through, we might be more on a level playing field. But by the time we get out of our own way in the government, they're on to the third generation of whatever it is they're developing. So we really need to be more agile. And so being aware of what's available and being able to, through the acquisition, and I won't even just say procurement process, but through the acquisition process, to be flexible enough to either pilot and or bring on new technologies quick enough to make them matter. People often criticize the length of the acquisition process, and procurement's really a fairly small part of that, because by the time, I get people visit me all the time and say, we've got this great product, we think you could use it, this particular division or whatever. To turn that into a requirement, get it funded, that takes a long time. We can go buy it in a couple months probably, but getting it into the acquisition framework, and DHS some years ago evolved their own DoD 5000 structure to I wouldn't say they did it to enhance procurement or acquisition. It's more like the DoD structure, and we're fighting threats every day. I mean, we need to have a construct that allows us to say, I was at a vendor, and our administrator will do that. I was up at someplace in Boston or Silicon Valley, and I saw something we need to buy that right away. I can't wait 3 years to get that. I can't wait 6 months to get that. I want to buy that right now and start fielding it. And we have the tools to be able to do that if they can get the money. Money sometimes is one of our biggest obstacles, but understanding what's out there, understanding what you're trying to do, and working with the procurement people, as has been said on the panel also, we're sort of, I always tell people, we're kind of like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You got something you need, bring a definition of it, bring the money, and we'll make it happen for you.
So let's apply that to artificial intelligence. I'm sure everybody here is wondering, well, how are these tools going to, especially generative AI tools, make it into agency missions, into the way agencies operate? The executive order on artificial intelligence is, I think, a great start, but there's a lot of unanswered questions in there, and as providers of technology, we're working to answer those questions with government. So what's that conversation like in your offices today? Are you getting requests? I want to use ChatGPT. I want to use this Gen AI tool.
I'd say we're probably at the beginning of what you're hearing. We're using some robotics, RPA, to automate some very manual, less thought-involved processes today. AI may be being used out there in the intel community to try to analyze data better. I think there's more risk attached to it today than there is. I think we're more looking at how to counter it as it tries to subvert our effectiveness as threat responders. So we're at the beginning stage. I think later you're going to hear from Eric Heisen, who's our new AI official, and I'd be interested to hear that also. But I think we're starting slow. We have to determine what AI can do for us, and we have to make sure it's secure. I think we're in the middle of embracing and implementing cybersecurity everywhere to protect the data. A lot of the DHS components create and store a lot of data. We have to protect that, number one, and we don't want to introduce things that we don't fully know what they're going to do. So I think that's a little bit of a risk-based.
So how about a CBP, Nick? Any clear use cases, or what are you hearing from OIT?
Well, I think that the Bill's tease for Mr. Heisen was very good, and in the procurement shop we have had conversations about AI, but it's very much in its nascent stage in terms of its use. We use RPA, and I think that we're with a lot that we do and the mission that we have our heads down meeting the need of the day, and we're relying on our partners in OIT to assist us with the AI piece, but it's so soon for us in terms of that type of using it within our office. This is nothing against this part of the how the government works, but we just moved to electronic contract files a couple of years ago. So that leap, will it come? Yes, but not right. We're not there right now.
Can you envision, and Patrick, I'd love to get your perspective on this too, you envision an opportunity to use generative AI capabilities to make contracting more efficient? Could you, summarize proposals? Could you generate RFPs? Are there ways to? It's a laborious process at times, right? Could you summarize? Summarizing a proposal, rank or some. Are those things that are conceivable in your office one day? What do you think, Patrick?
You want to take that, Nick, or? Okay, I wasn't sure who that was directed
No, I mean, it was. You start. Well, I'd love to get Bill's perspective on it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge potential. There's the short term and there's the long term. Short term, thankfully, DHS gave us permission recently on government computers to use generative AI, a few different large language models. So I think short term, we're using that for market research. We're using that for all.
Tell me how you use it for market research.
Okay, yeah, and I do want to say we can only use that for non-public data. So all the data that Bill's referring to, off limits.
Right.
So, but as far as like using it for market research, I had a zero trust requirement that I was, and this was actually pre-authorization, so I was doing it on my personal computer. But so how do we assess a sole source justification if we haven't adequately done our market research? ChatGPT, who are the leaders in this zero trust category of, because I had been told that there was really only one player in the game. I consulted the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and that gave some information, but ChatGPT kind of got me started down the path of, hey, here are the other players in the game for this. So long term, yeah, absolutely. There's going to be, I think the sky's the limit if we have, if we kind of have our handcuffs off. So right now we're handcuffed to using only certain kinds of data, but we're law enforcement. So if law enforcement officers could go in there into a ChatGPT and get CBP, get TSA data and ICE data just with a simple prompt, I think it's doable. It's a question of whether or not we're comfortable enough with these language models.
Sort of what you're describing are domain-specific large language models, right? They're smaller. They're focused on a particular kind of data. They're more curated. They have an intention. It's not all the data on the internet. So I mean, those smaller large language models are. I think we're going to see a lot of those come from industry into go ahead. That's something I see coming.
Well, and the reality is when we start seeing proposals generated using AI, why not evaluate them using AI?
That doesn't scare me. I mean, there's inherently governmental functions. So inherently, the contracting officer is going to be the one who's obligating money. And that's why I'm so happy that we're up here, is we're the gatekeepers. So whether or not ChatGPT turns out a brilliant interpretation of these proposals and turns it into something that's passably good English, it's going to be the contracting officer that puts pen to ink. So keeping that human in the loop. Also, I think a lot of the fear is that a lot of really smart people are afraid of bias in large language models. And they know a lot more about it than me, and I respect their authorities on this. There is that human element of bias as well in reviewing a proposal. So you can't eliminate bias. Just everybody has preconceived notions that go into your interpretation of a proposal. And the fact that that's part of the calculus in bringing on board these large language models, I think is only going to make government.
I appreciate that we're talking about it, right? And, that there's guidance from DHS and an approach to begin a conversation because it's coming, right? It's going to be impossible to avoid. It'll just take longer, and it won't turn out as well if we're not engaging in this kind of dialogue today. So that's a very positive sign. Nick, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I mean,
but we want audience questions too. But Nick, why don't you share?
No, I think that I like having the opportunity to work with my team and hear from them, and they all bring unique perspectives to the jobs that they have. I rely on them. They do a great job, and I want them to continue doing a great job. So I might be the opposite, but I don't want them being removed from the process. I think that they're bringing business acumen to the process, and I'm not aware of a chat GPT or an AI that's going to bring all that different perspective and experience to the process, where that is going to be able to make a fair and reasonable determination, which is the soul of our job, and be able to do the things that they're able to, that sort of unique experience and to the process. So, I like the job that they're each doing. I want them to continue doing that, what they're doing, and I think they hold a unique place in the process. And I kind of shudder that we would use something other than a government official to rank a proposal or understand what each contractor's unique technical approach is. So. And that goes for our evaluators as well.
It'll be interesting to see how this evolves. We have about 5 minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Good, no questions. So, good.
All right, woman on the
5 minutes left. That's it.
Just share your name and where you're from.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Joanne Newkirchen. I'm a federal employee with FEMA. And I'm actually going to raise a question that's on the topic of IT modernization, but you have not yet discussed today. And that is related to the DHS CIO's strategic objective to support modernization in place. And I'm wondering whether that's a topic that you've engaged with on the contracting side and how you see that potentially changing operations and maintenance contracting going forward.
Well, I'm sure if Bobby McCain were here, he would say, no, Bobby McCain was supposed to join us on the panel. He didn't. Modernization, some of it's being forced, by the data center closing down and everybody moving to the cloud, implementing cybersecurity, modernizing to use workflow tools that are emerging, so we're certainly having those conversations. We have a relatively new CIO at TSA, and he's and his new team, as they're coming on board, are taking some new viewpoints to how we ought to be doing IT and governance and modernization at TSA. So over the next couple of years, I think you're going to see a transformation to different ways of doing things, a little bit more enterprise approach to IT services, not having siloed platforms. Right now we've got people using SharePoint in every office, different instance, and looking at Salesforce or ServiceNow, and I think he wants to consolidate some of that. So we are having those discussions to, for several reasons. One is efficiency and optimization of resources, but just to take advantage of some of the tools and technology that's coming up. So we are having those I think it varies by component, but we're certainly trying to do a lot of that now.
I want to see if we can get one more question in here. David, gentleman up front.
Thank you. Slava Katz with Sky Solutions. I really thought the discussion about taking on risk in the context of the DHS environment was very interesting, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit if you could. So in order to take on risk, you, I think, also have to define the problem, right, as you were pointing out, Bill, in a way that allows industry to almost provide solutions that can reflect the risk that is defined in the problem in a way, right? And so do you find that there is an education process that needs to occur with your CEOs, with your cores, or the people who are actually creating the SOOs and SOWs and PWSs, et cetera, to formulate the problem in a way that allows the industry to respond in a way that can integrate integration, that can innovation, that can integrate solutions that are innovative enough that sort of keep you on the edge with the landscape.
Are we talking about risk and innovation in the same conversation?
Right, how to
do you
implement
guys see that
risk.
happening?
And right, if you're risk averse, you're not going to want to change anything. You're going to want to double down on security and
ICE and CBP, I'm sorry, CBP, Nick, are you seeing that risk innovation dialogue?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the communication that we have with industry, earlier on in the process, that they're going to tell us, their thoughts about the problems that we have. I think that it's a sort of a scale in terms of working with our contracting staff in terms of how they deal with risk. We try to be as engaged with industry as possible and let those individuals know that there is no risk in talking with ultimately our partners in meeting the mission. We're only going to get better outcomes if we're working with folks and that they're our partners as opposed to a problem that we have to deal with. And so that's how we engage with industry, and we want to be. There's a time and a place for being risk averse, but we try to mitigate that as much as possible, and we want to be as forward leaning as possible with how we do things on a day-to-day basis, so that and that's one way to mitigate risk.
Final thought, Patrick, you want the last word?
On risk?
Yeah, risk, innovation.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, so I'll bring it back to AI. Like, how are we going to deal with the risk of falling behind on AI? How are we going to, mitigate that risk? And we're having conversations about funding. All the budget stuff happens before it lands on contracting's desk, but we advise, and like I said, we're the gatekeeper. So we have test cases. DHS has a list of AI test uses. How much of that is going to get funded? How are we going to mitigate the risk of us not having some of these efficient large language models that we see could utilize? Like if I was able to type that in and get an RFP churned out in 30 seconds versus 2 weeks, get it to industry, get their input on it.
You'd speed it all up.
Right.
So it's that collaboration we talked about in the beginning. It's having that conversation about innovation, but recognizing risk and realizing we have to live with it. We can't avoid it. But
10 seconds. We talk about AI. I would urge people, if you see a problem that we advertise and you think there's an AI solution that can help solve it, that's what we want to hear about.
all right. Well, what a great way. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
One thing, and this is more, I know Patrick had talked a little bit about the contracts at the beginning. I did want to just make one announcement regarding upcoming procurements for CBP, Enterprise Business Management and Support Services 2.0. So we had put in an announcement on SAM and also I believe on eBuy about our plans, holding a industry day and a draft RFP. We do plan on doing that. We do plan on doing it very soon. And I also wanted to just say, just for everyone's awareness, we do not plan on using a self-scoring model. So that's going to be the approach. Come on. We will not be using a self-scoring approach for EBMSS 2.0.
All right. Well, that's big news to end our session on. So thank you, everybody. Thank our panelists, and great conversation.